Throughout the United States during the 1980s and 90s, people were fearful for their lives, paranoid about contracting a nameless disease infecting men and women all over the country. The gay community was in shambles, between discrimination and death counts rising into the 10,000s. They needed a voice, and the public needed to listen. Greg Louganis became the voice for an entire generation of people struggling. Known as the most successful diver in Olympic history, Greg Louganis used his platform to reveal his personal struggles by coming out in 1995 as a gay athlete diagnosed with HIV. By associating his well-known face with a deadly virus which was misunderstood by an entire nation, he was able to overcome his personal tragedy to raise HIV awareness, dispel myths about gay men, and change people's perceptions of homosexuality.
Why are you doing it?
I wanted my story to, to motivate, those people who are HIV positive to be responsible, and also to, to understand that life isn't over yet. That HIV and AIDS is not a death sentence.
At an early age, Greg knew he was different. In school, he was bullied because of the color of his skin. At home, he dealt with an adoptive father who was only interested in his successes. And internally, he struggled with his own sexuality. His mom decided to put him in gymnastics and dance classes at age 3, after watching him copy his sister's dance moves at the studio and around the home. Greg enjoyed both of these, but at age 9, he decided to start using his gymnastic skills on the diving board of his family's swimming pool. His mother worried about him hurting himself, so she enrolled him in diving lessons. He met immediate success. At 11 years old, he made waves at the 1971 Junior Olympics by scoring a perfect 10. In the years following, his wins only became greater, and by 1975, he had moved in with his then coach, former Olympic diving champion, Sammy Lee. Sammy was training Greg in hopes of him winning gold at the 1976 Olympics. When the 1976 Olympics came around, 16-year-old Louganis won silver, second to Klaus DiBiase, Italy's best diver and 2-time Olympic champion on the 10-meter platform. After training with gold in mind, Louganis' second-place finish felt like a failure. His coach, Sammy Lee, had pushed him hard to beat DiBiase, and losing to him in '76 ate away at his confidence. On stage and in the pool was where Greg had always felt the best about himself, so he realized he needed a change of pace. In 1978, he accepted a scholarship to the University of Miami, where he began working with the USA diving coach Ron O'Brien. O'Brien had just moved his program from Mission Viejo, California, to Boca Raton, Florida. Here, his diving success continued. He won many competitions, but he didn't feel he fit in with the team. Rumors about his sexuality swirled around USA Diving. Greg's teammates even refused to room with him because of his suspected homosexuality, so he sought friendship with the Soviet divers. But by now, the name Greg Louganis was globally known, and he was the international favorite to win at the 1980 Olympics, which were ultimately boycotted by the US due to the Soviet Union's invasion of Afghanistan. The boycott only pushed Greg harder. He wanted a gold medal, and he would do anything to get it. After months of practicing around the clock, Louganis made it to the '84 Olympics, winning gold in both the platform and springboard events. Louganis had dominated the headlines for several years, but as of 1985, the only name making waves in the media was HIV. People all over the US were being plagued with this deadly new disease that nobody understood. HIV was known as the gay man's cancer because it was predominantly found in the gay community. There were television specials, newspaper and magazine articles, and even political interviews, all trying to explain this mysterious illness. Men all over the country were becoming ill and dying painful deaths with no help from the medical field. Many doctors wouldn't care for AIDS patients, fearing they would contract the deadly disease, and the ones who did had very little knowledge of how to treat them. AIDS was considered a death sentence, and there was no effective treatment or cure. In 1985, Greg was gay, sexually active, and aware of HIV, but he felt untouchable. High off of one victory and hungry for another, AIDS hadn't yet crossed his mind. He was striving to win gold in both springboard and platform again, which would make him the only diver in history to complete the double-double. Louganis threw himself into conditioning and practice for the upcoming '88 Olympic Games in Seoul, South Korea. While Greg trained, the mass hysteria about HIV and AIDS only worsened. With the new enzyme-linked immunoabsorbent assay blood test known as ELISA, more people than ever before were diagnosed with HIV. Efforts to spread HIV awareness were growing fast. Despite these major breakthroughs, the blatant discrimination towards gay men continued. Acclaimed HIV and LGBTQ author Mark S. King shared his experience with AIDS discrimination in 1985 in a recent interview.
Television. I mean, television has got preachers on it who are saying, see, we told you so. Oh, he's HIV positive and he was in the public pool. They were draining pools. Draining the pools. You didn't give me an apartment because I have HIV. Mm-hmm. You won't even bury me. You won't bury me in the cemetery because I have HIV.
In 1987, 1 million Americans were infected with the virus. When Greg Louganis' then boyfriend became ill, the two began to worry about the threat of HIV. Soon after getting sick, Louganis' boyfriend took the ELISA test. It came back positive and he knew he was dying. Greg then immediately got tested, and 6 months before the 1988 Olympic Games, he too was diagnosed with HIV. He was immediately put on AZT. AZT was the only drug on the market to help combat HIV, so with his treatment, he decided it was in his best interest to keep training and proceed on to the Olympic Games. Over the months leading up to competition, Greg was in a physical and emotional whirlwind, but he never showed it, keeping up his reputation of diving's golden boy. Louganis finally reached the '88 Olympic Games, and all was going smoothly until the first preliminary event. On his 9th dive on the 3-meter springboard, Greg smashed his head into the board, sending a shockwave through the diving nation. Audiences feared that this tragedy would end Louganis' career, but his greater concern was the tragic impact his diagnosis could have on others. Fearing for himself, the other divers, and the medics working on his head, but with Coach Ron O'Brien's support, he put his fears behind him and managed to push forward. Keeping quiet and working hard, he managed to again win the springboard and platform events, accomplishing his goal of the double-double. Greg had the world at his feet, but no one knew how close he was to falling. After years of struggling with his public identity, Louganis decided to break his silence. On February 23, 1995, Greg went on the show 2020 with Barbara Walters and came out during the interview as not only gay, but also as HIV positive, making him the first Olympic athlete to come forward about living with HIV. His coming out was met with mixed reactions. While many stood behind Greg after loving him and following him for years, others were angry that he went on to compete in 1988 with his illness, because they felt he could have infected others, especially after he hit his head on the diving board. In spite of the varied reactions, Louganis went on to write and publish his tell-all memoir, Breaking the Surface, in which he discussed his life, career, sexuality, diagnosis, and much more. He wrote this book to come clean and to encourage others to do the same. He spoke about the secrets he had kept, not only about his sexuality, but also about his substance abuse and violent relationships. Greg recalls how all of the threats and mistreatment made him disguise who he really was. Though the gay rights movement was allowing people to come out in 1985, many homosexuals and HIV-positive men and women were still living in fear. In his book, he pleads for people to let go of fear and judgment, encouraging the removal of all HIV stigma. Once he came out, Louganis joined many activism groups, including the Human Rights Campaign, and he began speaking nationwide. He inspired other athletes to come out as HIV positive, like G. Wallace, an Australian trampoline gymnast. Today, he continues to work closely with USA Diving, mentoring young students. Greg taught everyone that having HIV doesn't make you any less of a person. His personal triumph showed the world that you can have HIV, be gay, and still accomplish everything you want. This helped to break through the stereotypes of gay men at the time. Greg Louganis was the spark that led many other well-known people to come out and speak their truths. He turned a tragic diagnosis into a triumphant stride for all those struggling with HIV and their sexuality.
I'm a diver, I'm an Olympian, I'm also a gay man living with HIV, but most importantly, I'm a person.